Hey everybody, my name is Micah Ranke with Bow Only Outdoors, and the tip I'm about to share with you has made the biggest difference for me over the years, and it has to do with nocks. Having appropriately weighted arrow nocks is critical to accuracy downrange and consistency in your hunting arrows. Before I dive in, I'll let Josh explain further.
Now the difference in nock weight between a standard Easton X nock and a nocturnal lighted nock is about 15 grains. And that really doesn't sound like a whole lot, but once you start to stretch it out to some distance, you're really going to start to notice those arrows just not flying together. The ones with the nocturnals that are weighing heavier are obviously going to fly and fall just a little bit lower, especially as we go further and further out in distance. So I'm going to hop back here to the range and I'm going to start shooting. I'm going to show you guys the drop difference between a standard X nock and a nocturnal nock or a weighted nock all the way out to 100 yards. 3 arrows will have the standard Easton X nock, weighing at about 8 to 9 grains on average. The other 3 arrows will have a nocturnal nock and 2 weighted Easton X nocks to simulate the weight of the nocturnal nock. The first group we're going to shoot is at 40 yards. Okay, let's go take a look. Okay, so just at 40 yards, you can see there's quite a bit of a difference. These are top 3 arrows are the arrows with the standard X nocks. These bottom 3 arrows are the 2 weighted X nocks to match the weight of the nocturnals. So that's about, just going off an average here, almost 2.5 to 3 inch drop at just 40 yards. Okay, we're lined up with our 100-yard target. We're going to shoot our 6 arrows and then we're going to go check out the difference. Sixth shot was perfect. Let's go take a look. Okay, well, so these are obviously the original Easton X nocks that weigh around 8 to 9 grains. These bottom 3 arrows are the nocturnal and the 2 weighted Easton X nocks. So we'll just take an average of these 3 shots and say that it's sighted in right for that little white piece of paper that I was aiming at. If we go up to the top group, measure that down, that's an average drop of almost 8 to 9 inches at 100 yards just from the 15 grain difference with the nocks. And I want to touch on this just a little bit because I know some people get confused with it with FOC and where that weight is located on the arrow. It actually does not make a difference as far as arrow drop goes where that weight is located on the arrow. If you had 15 grains on the front of the arrow or 15 grains on the back of the arrow, it's going to drop exactly the same amount. That's because the mass of the arrow is the same. It doesn't matter where it's at within that arrow, even if there's way more weight up front, it's still going to drop at the exact same amount because it's the same weight. So with these nocks just weighing 15 grains lighter, the nocturnals weighing 15 grains heavier, you've got an 8 to 9 inch drop at 100 yards, at least out of my setup. Next, Mike is going to take his nocks and show you how to add weight so that your nocks can be the same weight as any lighted nock.
Now that you're aware of the importance of having consistently weighted arrow nocks, let's dive into the process. Now before I get started, I do want to mention this was not originally my idea. A gentleman told us about this tip a couple years back and we really liked the idea, so we're just here to pass on the information. So with that, here's the tip. Putting screws in your nocks. You can use screws, nails, wooden dowels, anything that will weight the nock down to make it consistent with the weight of your lighted nocks. Now, as Josh described earlier, this is very important to accuracy downrange. So now you can have consistently weighted arrows throughout your setup, whether hunting with lighted nocks, hunting with regular nocks, or just practicing down at the range with your normal nocks. They all weigh the same, and when you're ready for hunting season, you can put your lighted nocks on. They will weigh the exact same as the nocks you've been using all year, and you're ready to go. So the first step is going to be to weigh your lighted nocks. These are nocturnals. I've been using them a while. Going to use them again this season. They weigh right around 23 grains, give or take just a little bit. So 23 is the magic number. That's what I'm looking for. The X nock, standard nocks that come in the Easton Axis 5mm weigh right around 9 grains, sometimes a little bit less, 8.8, 8.6 maybe, but right around that. So I need to get roughly 14 grains of screw or additional weight to match the weight of my lighted nock. Now it's important, a lot of different brands and sizes of lighted nocks weigh differently, so you need to weigh the ones you'll be using so you know exactly what weight you're shooting for. So now that I know the weight of my lighted nocks that I'll be using, I need to use some screws that will combine with the regular nocks to equal the lighted nock weight. So what I came up with was just these wood screws. I got them at Lowe's. You can probably find them at Home Depot, Menards, or a lot of other hardware stores. But these are brass screws. You can also use steel, but the ones I found to work best for my situation is the number 4 by 1 inch screw. So that first number 4, that's the gauge of the screw or the width of the outside of the diameter of the threads. So number 4 is pretty important. If I went to a number 6, it would be too big probably to fit inside of my X nock. So number 4 is pretty key, and I believe you can also use the number 4 by 1.25, so 1.25 inch steel screws. Brass is just a little bit heavier, so that's why it weighs a little bit different. I'm just using the inch long, but either of those should work. The most important thing is finding what works best for you and for your lighted nocks. For some nocks, that might be screws that are a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, maybe a little bit heavier. You just need to match up what works for you. I actually took my scale into Lowe's and just weighed these packages and divided it by 5 because there's 5 in here, subtracted a little bit for the packaging, and got a really rough number that I knew would work for the screws that I got, so that's what I went with and it worked out. So now that I know my target weight is 23 grains, I'm gonna weigh my nock and my screw to see where it's at. 23.8, so that's gonna be a little bit too heavy, so I'm gonna need to either grind down the head of the screw to lose a little bit of weight, or what I like to do is cut off the tip of the screw to my desired weight. Now before I go cutting the screw down, I want to make sure I leave a little bit of room for the weight of the glue that I'll be using. For this, I've been using Gorilla Super Glue. It's worked really well for me, but you can use pretty much any sort of fletching glue or insert glue or anything like that that really has a tight bond and it'll keep that screw in there solid. So for this particular glue and how much I use in my nocks, it weighs about 0.6 grains. So that means my final cut down screw weight plus the nock weight needs to come out about 22.4 grains so that 0.6 from the glue adds up to 23 even. Now you don't have to be this picky if you don't want to. It only adds up to about half a grain, maybe a little bit more, maybe a full grain at most. But I like to be as confident in my setup as possible, so I want to be as detailed as I can in this process. Like I said, there's a couple different options for removing weight if your screw is too heavy. I like to cut the tip off, but you can also grind this head down just a little bit as well. Now the benefit of grinding the head down is you can actually glue the whole thing in first, get your total weight, which is probably going to be quite a bit too heavy because your glue and the head of the screw, but then you can just grind down the head of the screw to your exact weight, and you don't have to guess what your glue weight will be. But in my case, I'm just going to cut down the tip. So I've got this Leatherman, and you can see I have the screw in there on the wire cutters, and I'm just going to put just a little bit. You can see there's a little bit sticking out there. Just cut the tip off and get started like that. You can always do a little bit more. So I'm just going to cut this off and see where I'm at in terms of weight. There we go. We got the screw cut. So let's weigh it with the nock and see where it's at. 22.8, so a little bit too heavy when we include our glue weight. I'm just going to cut a little bit more off until I get the desired weight I'm looking for. All right, 22.4, that's perfect, right what I'm looking for. So now that my screw is cut down, I'm going to glue it in. I'm just going to use a little bit of super glue here. Try not to get a crazy amount, but enough to hold it in there solid. Make sure there's quite a bit on the tip. Something like that. Definitely want to get enough in the threads, just like that. Then I'll just place it right in there. And what I like to do is actually screw it in just a little bit And if you have a screwdriver or a Leatherman, you can actually screw it in a little bit further. I'm just going to take this Leatherman here, just twist it, and actually screw it into the nock, and the plastic of the nock just a little bit. And try to make it as centered as possible. It's not going to be perfect, but what you can do is actually put it inside the arrow shaft right away. These screw heads actually fit perfect inside the arrow shaft, so I actually need to seat this in the arrow shaft while it's drying, so it dries perfectly centered and does not get offline. And that way I know it's going to fit in there. If I let it dry outside of the shaft, then it might actually dry crooked and I wouldn't be able to get it in the shaft. So putting it in the shaft while it's drying is pretty important. So now I'm just going to let this dry. So the head of these screws actually fits perfect on the inside of these Easton Axis 5mm shafts. This does not have to be a requirement for your screws, your nails, or your shafts, but it does help align them perfectly in the center of the nock when drying. This is just how it worked out for me. You do not need to make this a priority. It's okay if they don't fit perfectly or if they don't even come close to fitting. That's totally fine. The weight is what we're really going for here in the Nocks. Just remember, if you do use a grinder or a file to take down the head of the screw after it's already dried in the nock, make sure it's not too sharp or too offset to one side or to the other, because you don't want to damage the inside of the carbon on your shafts. So it's important to note that the added weight to the back of the arrow will actually make the dynamic spine seem stiffer, which is important to keep in mind moving forward. So now that my screw is dried nicely in the nock, I'm going to weigh it and see where we're at. 23 grains even, perfect. So I can weigh my arrows with the lighted nock, so you can see they weigh right at 467 grains even. I can weigh the arrows with my weighted nocks. You can also see they weigh right at 467 even. Perfect. Now that I know my normal practice nocks and lighted hunting nocks weigh the exact same, this gives me a lot of confidence going into the hunting season knowing I've practiced with the exact same weighted arrow all year long and it hits consistently with my lighted nocks. Not only does this give me more confidence in a hunting situation, I no longer have to move my sight tape, re-sight in for lighted nocks, or deal with anything like that because all of my arrows weigh the exact same all across the board. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with a buddy. And if you'd like to see more archery tips like this one, subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching.